Today is, by the way, I'm not Dale. Dale is celebrating his anniversary with Corey. It's wonderful. So it's wonderful for them. You guys get stuck with me. And we got some that have joined us online, so that's nice. We're going to be in Numbers chapter 16. And my family, we're actually doing this, Dewey is put out again on Facebook, and I think he's some emails that if you want to go through the story again, the reading through the Bible in a year, he's putting an outline on there each week. And so we're doing that. And so we're in the process of wrapping up the book of Numbers. Numbers is just one of those exciting books, right? You get to read about all these names and responsibilities of people that you can't even pronounce their names. And it gets kind of confusing. And so I want us to, and that's why I went ahead and put this on the board, just to kind of give you an idea of where we're at. Today's going to be the last lesson as far as good lessons from bad guys. We're going to be looking at Korah, Abiram, and Dathan out of Numbers chapter 16. And where this all falls into place. So you got Jacob, and he had how many sons? Well, how many daughters did he have? One. Her name's Dinah. These are the names of sons, and to the best of my knowledge, this is actually in order of birth. So who's the firstborn? Reuben. Okay. Well, Levi, when it comes time for them to enter the promised land, Moses has given them, and that's part of what Numbers is about in Deuteronomy, and part of Exodus is you're going to get into this land, and God is going to bless each of the tribes. Except Joseph, he's kicked out because he's in Egypt, and he has two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And so Jacob ends up blessing Manasseh and Ephraim and leaves out Levi. The reason why Levi, and not that Levi's left out, but Levi gets set apart by God as the Levites are going to be the ones that conduct worship. So Levi has three sons, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, is how we're going to say that. And Gershon, and back in Numbers chapter 4, you don't have to go look at it unless you don't trust me. But back in Numbers chapter 4, Gershon, his people are chosen to focus on all the woven materials for the tabernacle. Remember, God told Moses to build this tabernacle to worship me. You got this outer court. You got the tent of meeting that's divided by this curtain. Inside here, you got the Ark of the Covenant. Then you got the table of incense. There's a candlestick in here. The altar for burnt offering is outside. So whenever Moses goes in to talk to God, he's going into the tent of meeting. And of course, they got this big courtyard, and this is where most of the burnt offering and all the sacrifices are taking place outside here. But then they also take blood inside to make atonement. And then sweet aroma sacrifices to God. And the Levites are in charge of that. And so Gershon, his family is in charge of making the curtains, making the tent, making all those things. And so whenever they move, that's their responsibility. Merari is in charge of all the wooden vessels, poles, anything that's used to prop things up and to set up this tabernacle. Because how long are they going to be hanging out in the wilderness? 40 years. So anytime God moves, they have to break this down and go set it up. And there are times when they go and they set it up, and they're only there for less than a week. And then there's times when they go and they set it up, and they're at the same spot for a year. And so they never know until God decides it's time to move. Kohath, as you read back in Numbers chapter 4, he gets put in charge of all the, we're just going to call them vessels, but it's all the items for worship. So the Ark of the Covenant, the table for the showbread, the candlestick, the altar of incense, the burnt offering altar, all these things that they actually use for worship, and all the materials and utensils they use for worship, the Kohathites are in charge of. So years ago, I heard a saying, it's one of those things, especially when you're a kid, you're like, oh, wow, that's right. Okay. Here's a saying I heard. All mothers are women, but not all women are mothers. Right? Wow, that like blow your mind? There's a reason why I'm saying that. Because here's something that maybe we did not know. All priests are Levites. Not all Levites are priests. Because as you go through, what you find out is the Kohathites are in charge of all the materials for worship. But then, so Kohath has 4 sons, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And I've got these names, but they're irrelevant to our story. So Amram has 3 kids, Aaron, and then Miriam, and then Moses. God decides that it's going to be through Aaron that the priesthood is going to take place. Aaron and his son. Can Korah have any priests in his family? No. Remember, God said something, that's what it's going to be. All the priests are going to come through the bloodline of Aaron. Is Korah irrelevant? Absolutely not. He has a purpose. He has a place. But it is not in the priesthood. Here's an interesting question. Was Moses a priest? And that's just fun. Because the answer is no, and the answer is yes. Moses took the place of the high priest to anoint Aaron as high priest, and then Moses steps back. So he has a place in the priesthood, but then it's going to be Aaron and his sons, and then of course you got Leviticus chapter 10. The first 2 sons of Aaron are Nadab and Abihu. Remember how they died? Fire, that's fire, comes out of this and destroys them. And I'm bringing that up because it's going to happen again today. So as we get into this story, and I like that Dewey put a little cute story in here that I want to share just because it makes a good point. And so let me read this to you. It's called The Wolf and the Lamb. A stray lamb stood drinking early one morning on the bank of a woodland stream. And that very same morning, a hungry wolf came by farther up the stream, hunting for something to eat. He soon got his eyes on the lamb. As a rule, Mr. Wolf snapped up such a delicious morsel without making any bones about it, but this lamb looked so very helpless and innocent that the wolf felt like he ought to have some kind of excuse for taking its life. And so the wolf says, "How dare you paddle around in my stream and stir up all the mud?" He shouted fiercely. "You deserve to be punished severely for your rashness," because this lamb is on the stream. But the lamb says, "Your Highness," replied the trembling lamb, "do not be angry. I cannot possibly muddy the water you're drinking up there. Remember, you're upstream. I'm downstream." The wolf says, "You do muddy it," retorted the wolf savagely. "And besides, I've heard that you told lies about me last year." The lamb pleaded, "How could I have done so? I wasn't born until this year." "Well, if it wasn't you, it was your brother." "I have no brothers." "Well then," snarled the wolf, "it was someone in your family anyway, but no matter who it was, I do not intend to be talked out of my breakfast." And without any more words, the wolf seized up the lamb and carried her off to the forest. Point of the story is the tyrant always finds an excuse for his tyranny. We love to justify ourselves. So let's get into this story. Numbers chapter 16. And somebody go ahead and read up through verse 14. Starting in verse 1.
Now Korah, the son of Izhar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, with Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On the son of Peleth, sons of Reuben, took action, and they rose up before Moses, together with some of the stones of Israel, 250 leaders of the congregation, chosen in the assembly, men of renown. they assembled together against Moses and Aaron and said to them, you have gone far enough, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is in their midst. So why do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord? When Moses heard this, he fell on his face. And he spoke to Korah and all his company, saying, tomorrow morning the Lord will show who he is, and who is holy, and will bring him near to himself. Even the one whom he will choose, he will bring near to himself. Do this. Take censers for yourselves, Korah and all your company, and put fire in them, and lay incense upon them in the presence of the Lord tomorrow. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the one who is holy. You have gone far enough, you sons of Levi. Then Moses said to Korah, hear now, you sons of Levi, is it not enough for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the rest of the congregation of Israel to bring you near himself, to do the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation to minister to them? And he has brought you near, Korah, and all your brothers, sons of Levi, with you? And are you seeking for the priesthood also? Therefore, you and all your company are gathered together against the Lord. But as for Aaron, who is he that you grumble against him? Then Moses sent a summons to Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab. But they said, we will not come up. Is it not enough that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to have us die in the wilderness, but you would also lord it over us? Indeed, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor have you given us an inheritance of fields and vineyards. Would you put out the eyes of the men? We will not come up.
Thank you. There is so much going on in there. So they get to this point to where you got Korah, and if you notice in verse 1, there's four guys mentioned. Korah, he's the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, son of Levi. You got certain Reubenites, Dathan, and I always pronounce him Abiram, so I'll probably keep saying that, but I like Abiram too. He's the son of Eliab, and On, the son of Peleth, became insolent. Or they gathered men and they rose up against Moses. You never read about On again. So you got to wonder if maybe he finally recognized the folly, came to his senses, repented. But you still got Korah, Abiram, and Dathan. Now you got, and that's why I put this over here. Because you got Abiram and Dathan, they're sons of Reuben. Do they have any even right to argue about the priesthood? No. So they got some other things going on. You know, just in this past year, not talking about COVID, but other things that have gone on. Have there been any protests going on this past year that we've noticed? I mean, people feel, we live in a society where if you don't like something, if something offends you, then we all feel like we have the right to make a big deal about it and huff and puff. It's no different back then. But primarily our focus is going to be on Korah. And it's interesting to hear what he says. Notice in verse 3, you get Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and then they got 250 other leaders. Okay, so if you go back and read earlier in Numbers, God had Moses appoint leaders of each group, you know, and even you got Jethro's advice to him earlier, you know, you get some guy to be over 500 and over 100 and over 50 and over 10 just to get some help. So you got these leaders. They get these leaders on their side, these other 250. Whether or not they're all Levites, probably not, but probably some are. They're just scattered from the various tribes. But notice verse 3, they came as a group to oppose Moses and Aaron and said, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Is that wrong? No, it's not, except for the part you've gone too far, and we'll talk about that in a second. Why then do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? And the point I want to make from that is it's interesting how when we do have a grievance, one of the things we try to do is to show how holy and right we are. Moses, are you saying that these other 11 tribes are not holy? That God is not with them? And they would expect the argument to go, well, yeah, no, I'm not saying that. Then why do you set yourself up? Okay. Did Moses set himself up? Do you remember what happened when God called Moses? He gave more excuses than Gideon did. He tried to get out of it. And that's how Aaron gets brought into the picture, because Moses finally says, God, I don't want to do it. And God is angry, and he says, Aaron will come with you and he'll speak for you. Okay, that's all that in a different book. But you've gone too far. And so Moses, I love this in verse 4, because how do you react when somebody criticizes you or confronts you and you feel it's unfair or unjust? We're supposed to just think about it and not be honest. Yeah, we get defensive. What's the very first thing Moses does? He falls on his face. Does that have anything to do with those 253 men in front of him? No. He's falling on his face before God. I mean, he's either going in prayer, he's submitting to God, wants God to recognize what's going on here, because that's what you're going to see as a conversation as it plays out. And Moses says, you're arguing about the priesthood? God has allowed you to be very significant in the instruction of people, because again, not all priests are Levites, but all Levites, all priests are Levites, but not all Levites are priests. But all Levites have a responsibility to do what? To teach, to lead, to still contribute to the service. You know, one of the possible examples of wrapping this up at the end of the lesson is we all have a place. You know, Paul says God created each member of the body where he wants it to be. That's exactly what he's done here. And so Moses is saying, none of these guys, except for this family, get to participate in worship the way you guys do. And yet you want to argue about it. You want to argue that this isn't good enough. We want this. And so notice Moses' response at the very end of verse 7. Back up to verse 6. You, Korah, and all your followers are to do this. Take your censers, and tomorrow put fire in the incense in them before the Lord. The man the Lord chooses will be the one who is holy. You Levites have gone too far. Don't you just love using other people's words and throwing it right back in your face? Moses does too. You Levites are the ones who have gone too far. You're being presumptuous of, I'm not happy serving where God wanted me to serve. I'd rather have this position. And that's where the problem comes in. You know, I have a little note here just to throw it out. So I had a little note here to throw it out so that you guys, because sometimes I talk too fast, I know, and I apologize for that. I understand this whole thing with, so back in Numbers chapter 4, where we get this, Gershons do the woven things, Merari the wooden things, the vessels is Kohath. In verse 15, you get this warning, even when you guys are moving these things, you be careful not to touch them. You touch them, you'll die. They had in the ark, they had, well, and even on the altar, and all these things, they put little hoops so that you could put rods in them, and they carried them like this. That's why in 2 Samuel chapter 6, when David's first attempt to bring the ark into Jerusalem fails because David decided to stick it on a cart, because he did not talk to God about it first. Did not even go back to see what the law said he was supposed to do and how to do this. And Uzzah reaches up and touches it, and he dies. And we think that's unfair. They were already warned in Numbers chapter 4, verse 15. You touch it. Even the Kohathites, which Uzzah wasn't, who are supposed to be doing this stuff, aren't even allowed to touch it. Why? There's a very simple answer. God told them not to, and God is holy. And you will treat these things as holy. Therefore, you will do it when you read through the first 5 books, and especially in Exodus, and I think we're going to hit it again in some in Deuteronomy, God will say, you do it exactly according to the pattern I've given you. There is a reason why these things are taking place. And of course, all that is going to be fulfilled in Christ. We can't get there today. But so I want us to look at the accusations, though, because there's basically 4 of them in verses 3 through 14. The first one is Korah. Again, you've gone too far. The whole community is holy. Basically, what he's saying is we should all be equals. We should all be allowed to lead ourselves. Matter of fact, there was a similar conversation in Genesis chapter 3 between a snake and a woman and a very silent husband who said, the day you eat of this fruit, you will be like God, able to know, to distinguish between good and evil. You will be in control. That's what Korah wants. The next argument is, why do you get to be the priest and not us? So you have that conversation in verses 8 through 10 of Moses. See, the priesthood, Korah and the other Levites are charging, it's been unfairly monopolized. Moses, why'd you pick your brother? Did Moses pick his brother? God did. See, and that's the thing that they tend to forget. The third accusation, and it's a funny one. Go look up at verse 13. Dathan and Abiram. They're refusing to come to Moses when he summons them. We're not going to come. Isn't it enough, verse 13, that you brought us out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the desert? What land did they just come out of? Egypt. What land did God say is a land flowing with milk and honey? Land of Canaan, the promised land, the land that God was going to give them. Did anybody ever say that Egypt was a land flowing with milk and honey? And yet they're taking these words that Moses has used, given to him by God, to say, that's where we were. And now you brought us out of here. You've let us out here to die. And then the fourth accusation is you brought us out here to make us your slaves. And there's a lot of conversation about what verse 14 actually means. My translation says, will you gouge out the eyes of these men? Brad, what did yours say?
Sorry.
Yours was a little bit different.
But would you put out the eyes?
Put out the eyes of these men. I think the newer NIV says, will you make slaves of all of us? Some people say it just means pulling the wool over your eyes by gouging out their eyes. But then, hey, can you ever think of anybody who's been made a slave by gouging out their eyes? You ever read the book of Judges? This big guy named Samson. And when they finally, he got a haircut and they took him, and what's the first thing they did to him? They gouged out his eyes. If you're a slave and you don't have any eyes, you're pretty much going to do whatever you're being told to do because you don't have a whole lot of other options. And so there's these four accusations. You know, you've gone too far. We're all holy. Why do you get to decide who gets to be a priest? You brought us out here to die. You brought us out here to make us slaves. Have you noticed that each one of those have nothing to do with the other? And that's the whole reason why I brought up the story. I like that story that dude put out in the beginning about the wolf and the lamb. It doesn't matter with some people if you can argue or refute their logic. They're just going to go to another thing. Well, then what about this? Well, then what about this? Because in their mind, they're right. And so they're going to avoid any type of actual reasoning. And so even, because that's what's ironic about it. You got Abiram and Dathan. Why are they coming up with Korah when they're not even Levites? Can you think of any reason why they might be?
So they're mad about something else, and they're just trying to stir up. Yeah.
They're firstborn. Who is supposed to get the blessing? You guys remember why Reuben doesn't get it? He slept with Bilhah, one of Jacob's, well, it was not Leah, it was Rachel's maidservant, and everybody knew about it. And so when it comes time for the blessings, Jacob goes right past him. Simeon and Levi don't get it. So if you go back to Genesis chapter 49, I think is where this takes place. Simeon and Levi don't get it either, and that's why it goes to Judah. And that's why, okay, you know this guy named Jesus? Guess which tribe he comes out of? Judah. Okay, that's the reason. Do you know why Simeon and Levi don't get the blessing? Because of Dinah. So Dinah was their sister who got raped. And so then they had this plan, you know, you guys, you want to marry our daughters, you want us to marry your daughters, well, then you guys have to get circumcised, because that would be unholy for us to intermingle with you unless you guys are all circumcised. And they're like, hey, yeah, let's do it. They get circumcised. Simeon and Levi go in and kill all the guys, which made Jacob a stench among those people, Jacob will say. And that's why he'll pass over Simeon and Levi. Why God chose Levi for the priesthood, I don't know. It's not up to me. I trust God. But you get down, and maybe it has to do with the heart of Moses. Because God doesn't spend any time with anyone else in Scripture like he does with Moses. God will say, I talk to prophets, I talk to people in dreams and in visions and in riddles. But with Moses, I will speak to him face to face. And so, we got distracted. So Abiram and Dathan, they're probably in on this because, hey, we want to overthrow Moses because we want our tribe to get back our place of authority of being the firstborn, despite Jacob's blessings. And then you get this rebellion, because here's the whole problem. With everything we've talked about, and looking at this, and I know it's kind of messy, but you know, Gershon is in charge of this part of the temple, Merari is in part of this part of the temple, Kohath is in charge of taking care of all the worship vessels of the temple. Where is the problem? The problem's in his heart. He's not satisfied to be the member that God has called him to be. And so it's his own ambition, even with Dathan and Abiram, sons of Reuben. It's a pride thing. It's a jealousy thing. I mean, they're allowing all these things to stir up these feelings, even though God has given them a purpose, given them a plan, and given them leading. They struggle with it. And Korah specifically, his accusations are primarily leveled right at Aaron, because he wants to be part of the priesthood. That's why Moses says, isn't it enough? You're a Levite. You Levites have gone too far. If you're not content, it'd be like Gershon saying, I want to carry the ark. No, that is not your place. And so it's interesting because we don't even get into it in this lesson, but if you go to the very next chapter, chapter 17, excuse me, chapter 17 is all about Aaron being vindicated by God. Okay, God tells Moses, you get the leaders from the 12 tribes, and you present 12 staffs, one from each tribe. And Levi has a staff that represents Aaron. They take him into the tent of meeting. They go to bed that night. They wake up the next morning. They come out, and 11 of the staffs look just like they did the night before. But one of them has budded. That's what Moses said would happen. But then when you read the descriptions, it not only budded, it bloomed and had nuts hanging off of it. Almonds, I think, is what it says. This dead piece of wood. Guess whose staff it was? Aaron's. And so once again, you have God vindicating Aaron that he is the priest. And so you got, because I had to look this up, because my family asked me what a censer was. I thought it was a bowl, kind of like an Aladdin's lamp type thing where you put the incense in and kind of, but it's not. A censer, apparently, I mean, it is a bowl, but it's got some holes in it, and it's got some chains, and then it's got a top part. And then they can carry it, with this chain or this rope. And so you put the incense in here. Okay, my incense smoke looks like my ropes. The ropes are straight. And the incense is coming out. That is a censer. And so they get all these men with the censers. Korah and Dathan and Abiram are just refusing to participate in this at all. And God says, okay, back away. And it's actually twice what God will tell Moses, just step away and let me take care of this. And so the second time, because they're refusing, you keep reading in verse 15 on through the story. But for sake of time, we won't read it. Moses says, all right, you know what? God's going to do something brand new. Just like in Genesis chapter 6, when Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, and God told Noah, I want you to build an ark. I'm going to do something. He didn't say, you don't read it there, but he's going to do something brand new because rain had not fallen on the earth until Genesis chapter 6. And he saves them through the flood. Moses says, God is going to do something brand new that you've never seen before. And so he warns everybody, because Abiram and Dathan, they refused to get out of their homes to come up to the tent of meeting. And so they warn everybody to back away from Korah's home, Dathan's home, and Abiram's home. Their families come out. And then as soon as Moses gets done talking, there's an earthquake. And the ground opens up and swallows up 3 families. Korah's, Dathan's, and Abiram's. And then it closes. God just did something brand new that nobody had ever seen before. Because Moses will say, if they die a natural death somehow, God has not picked me. But if he does something totally brand new. And so then the earth, it's interesting how many times the earth has to pay for man's sin. This earthquake takes place and swallows them up. So then you get the other 250, they're like, we need to be smarter about this. So they get their sensors and they go do what they're supposed to do. And then just like with Nadab and Abihu, guess what happens? Fire comes out and consumes them. Is there any confusion as to who God has picked to lead his people? But when you keep reading, guess what happens the very next day? I mean, people are so dim-witted sometimes. They're still complaining about Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, how they're dead. And these 250 guys got burned up. And that's not right. Why aren't you leading us right? I mean, doesn't the job description, let's say Green Lawn was looking for a minister or something like that. The job description was like, I want you to come to this place and lead these people into the promised land. And that's not good. A land flowing with milk and honey. Isn't that a job you'd like to have? And how do the people react? Complain about water, they complain about food, they complain about bread versus meat, they complain about why did you bring us out here to die? They complain when the 12 spies go to check out the land and come back and 10 say we can't do it, 2 say we can. And so they decide, hey, we're not going to do it. Later they complain because they're marching around and they can't go into the promised land. Why can't we go in? Because you didn't want to take it. Remember? These are the people that Moses is dealing with. And so, what are some lessons as we spend our last few minutes? What are some lessons we can get out of this story?
God sets the boundaries and he determines who has authority or position or whatnot. He sets the precedents, not us.
God is the one who rules. It's his ball. He makes all the rules and we just get to go by them. And so I told Marae when he came in, I said, I'm glad you're here because I want to use you as an example. Because Marae is one of our elders. The elders have told us at Greenlawn that they want us to wear a mask when we come into worship and when we go to Bible class. Do you know that there actually have been people complain about that? Which is shocking. Because it shouldn't matter what your view is on politics or even what your view is on the medical conditions of wearing a mask. If your elder tells you to do it, are you going to be like Moses? Or are you going to be like Korah? Because who decides who becomes an elder in this congregation? So yes, you submit to your leaders and you treat them with respect. And you trust them. If the elders decide, and they're meeting this afternoon, that, okay, we're going to take off masks, but for the next 6 months, everybody has to wear gloves. Yes, I'm being silly, but let's say it happens. Are you coming next week? I'm not going there if I have to wear gloves. Does it really matter? If you're asked to do something by your leaders, you do it. What's another lesson we get out of this?
I think it's a good reminder how important God's word is. I mean, we read his word here, not only through this story, but just through the New Testament and his commandments and his how strong and powerful his word is for us to have value in and to obey. God's gonna win. I mean, it's not how bad we want to fight it. If we don't agree with it, we're not gonna win. I mean, God wins. If we humbly submit to his word, I mean, that's what he wants us to do. Just like
It all has to do with trusting him. So Korah didn't get the position he wanted. So the question Korah has to ask himself, do I trust God? You get passed over for a position at work, or maybe a decision in your marriage doesn't go the way that you wanted it to go. Or maybe you're having some issues with your kids. Are you going to trust God?
He's going to kind of consume them with fire.
And that may be a possibility. It's funny. You just made me think about something I was thinking about a couple of weeks ago. It's interesting because when we were reading through Leviticus with my family, but I'm sorry, that's a tangent. Never mind. Okay, so this is what I was going to say, but I don't want to spend any time on it. There's actually a section, I think it's in chapter 18, where God gives permission for the high priest, for Aaron and his sons, to become unclean. And here's why that, to me, is significant. Because we read a lot, especially in Leviticus, about if you touch a dead body or if you do this, you'll be unclean for a week or for a day or until evening until you wash. You got the red heifer sacrifice, where you get the water of sprinkling is what it talks about, to be cleansed from that. And my whole thought process with that is being unclean isn't sinful. It still separates you from worship until you become clean. But too many times, and I don't know why I thought about that, we talked about that fire coming out and consuming. Too many times that's what we expect to happen. We want to happen. We want this vengeance to take care of them, instead of understanding this may not be this as big of a, and again, and that's why I didn't want to bring this up, because I'm still working on it through my mind, of the significance of, okay, so here we go. Here's how I'll answer this. James chapter 2, verses, I want to say 2 and 3. 12 and 13. Yeah, James 2, 12 and 13. Speak and act as those who will be judged by a law that gives freedom. Because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. Mercy triumphs over judgment. And you can take that to the bank. And aren't we so glad it does? Here's the ironic thing about mercy. We love it when we get it. We sure don't like to give it to other people. So understanding that God's in control, are we going to trust him? Another lesson, rebellion, even when it's cloaked with righteousness and virtue, is often self-centered and self-seeking. I mean, when we boil it down to why are we really complaining about this? Does it have more to do with an issue going on in our own heart? Or are we really trying to stand up and vindicate God and his holiness? Because that is not what was going on with Korah. Choose whom you will follow carefully. I mean, you got these 250 guys. You know, it'd been very easy if it was just one person saying, hey, let's rebel, to say, whatever. But how easy is it when it starts to become a group? And you start pulling more people in. Some of these guys may have had no clue. They may have just heard, yeah, we're trying to get back our rights as firstborn. Yeah, I would like that. Yeah, okay. We want a bigger share in the priesthood. Well, yeah, you know, I'd love to be able to offer a sacrifice. I think that's pretty cool. I get a special robe, you know. And then what happens? Don't be fooled, 1 Corinthians 15, verse 33, by those who say such things. Bad company corrupts good character. And of course, I've already mentioned the other one. The verse is 1 Corinthians 12, verse 18, and then later again in verse 24 and 25, that God has placed the different parts of the body where he wants them. Our job is to trust him and serve where we're at. I've heard people say, and I may have even been guilty of it myself, say things like, well, when I become an elder, I'm going to start doing this more. When I become a minister, when I finally get a good job and my kids get out of the house, then I'm going to start having more Bible studies with others. Here's the thing behind that. If you're not doing it now, what makes you think you're going to do it when the kids leave? So take your position that God has put you in, wherever it might be, and glorify him in it. And trust him that he will use you with whatever the situation is that's going on in your life.
We talked about in past classes how we only see our picture of what's going on, but God knows the big picture. And this story makes me think about that again, about how they only saw their small picture and they need to trust God with the big picture too.
Yeah, we're so busy in the here and now that we forget, like I think it was Murray who said earlier, or maybe it was Brandon, somebody, the victory's already been won. We know how the story ends. How are you going to behave as you go through it?
You know, it makes me think that apply to our modern day. People tend to think if you've got the clever arguments and you've got the big group behind you, that means you win. Right? Korah's had both of those things. But, you know, at the end of the process, I mean, it's still there's God's plan and design.
Yeah, if you're on the opposite side of God, it doesn't matter how many people you have. Just ask them.
Well, and that's interesting too, because you look and they basically said that Moses had the power to create this big hole in the ground and suck people up. Right? Because they said, you know, God or Moses, you know, destroyed God's people. So they're basically saying Moses is the one that had the power to do this against God and his people. And so even, you know, instead of saying, oh, you know, this, you know, God just did this, it was, oh, he's doing this against his people. Which is funny because they didn't have a lot of respect for Moses, and now all of a sudden he's got all this power to, you know, suck people into the ground. But
Yeah, and it's interesting because at the very beginning of Exodus, they're being, well, not Exodus, but after the spies come back, God tells them through Moses, okay, any male who is 20 years or older, you will die in this desert, except for Joshua and Caleb. What happened to Aaron? He died in the desert. What happened to Moses? At the doorstep of the promised land, he died in the desert. They already knew what their end was. And yet what are they still going to do? I want to complain, I want to kick, I want to scream, I want to say it's not fair. If we got somebody else in charge, maybe we'll have a different God with different views. And that's not the way it works. Any other thoughts or comments?
I think it also shows you can't just follow your leader.
Blindly, especially.
Yeah, it matters if you're following what God has said or not.
I don't usually teach in here, so let me go ahead and use the time. It looks like there's no been a bell, but I don't hear it. So go look at 2 Peter chapter 1 real quick. Because I had this in my notes to share, and I just wasn't sure if I was going to put it in there. But it's really interesting, verses 5 through 9. 2 Peter chapter 1. And you're familiar with at least the first part of it, because in chapter 1, verse 5, he says, for this reason you make every effort to add to your faith goodness, goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, brotherly kindness, love. Now notice verse 8. Because if you do this, if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. If you will trust God, read his word, let it build you up, help you to mature, like Paul talks about in the sermon, you will not be unproductive in Jesus. And then notice verse 9. But if anyone does not have them, he is nearsighted and blind. How can you be nearsighted and blind? I mean, that's just a double way of saying you're dumb and an idiot too. I mean, not only are you nearsighted and can't see right, you're blind and you can't see. And you've forgotten that you've been cleansed from your past sins. They came out of Egypt. And they kept forgetting what God had already done for them. And so they're going to complain and rebel and argue about position or about food or about family life, whatever it might be. Are we any different? Have we forgotten where we stand with God? That we've been forgiven of our past sins? Why wouldn't we want to add to our faith goodness and knowledge and self-control and perseverance and brotherly kindness and love? Is there really any other option? Think on these things. You'll have a blessed day.